You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports on the Lineup Media Group Podcast Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll discuss the recently announced Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie bout set for Bellator in February, when the two fighters will have a combined age of 101. Big John and I will also examine the decision of the new Japanese MMA promotion Rizin FF to name 45-year-old Tsuyoshi Kosaka as the opponent for Fedor Emelianenko's comeback fight on New Year's Eve, even though Kosaka has not fought in 9.5 years. And to mark the 22nd anniversary of the first UFC, we'll speak with the creator of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the great Art Davie. Plus, as we do on every episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. Submit them via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, and on Twitter by using the hashtag AskBJM. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Let's Get It On is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/letsgetiton. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, and MP3 player. Well, last Friday night during Bellator 145, it was announced that Ken Shamrock will face Royce Gracie in the Bellator cage in February. At the time of this bout, Shamrock will be 52 years old and Gracie will be 49. Shamrock has fought just once since 2010, the first-round knockout loss versus Kimbo Slice in June, which John refereed and I commentated. Gracie hasn't fought since June 2007, when he recorded a decision win over Kazushi Sakuraba. John, so there seems to be two reactions in the MMA community to this fight. It's a disgrace and I'm not going to watch, or it's a disgrace and I can't wait to watch.
You know what? It's hysterical that the way people look at this fight and stuff. And it's funny because I'm always talking about I don't like to see old people fight, and I don't. And the one thing that I do like about this one is they're both old, so I'm not worried about them hurting each other that bad. So, you know what? It's funny because, Strikeforce was started off of, Scott Coker bringing in Shamrock versus Gracie, but he couldn't get the original Shamrock Gracie, so he brought in Frank against Cesar Gracie, and you know what? It sold at 18,000 some seats sold for that fight, and it was the largest gate in the history of California. God, it had to be like 10, 12 years for an MMA fight, and I think he finally got the fight that he's always been searching for. He always wanted that Shamrock versus Gracie original, and he's now, and you know what? Both of these guys, they're older, and, people need to be careful of what they expect out of them in this fight. But this is one where I look at it and it's like, okay, they're both older guys. I'm okay with it. And yeah, I'll probably be watching.
It's a huge shift from Bellator. Obviously, I know a little bit about huge shifts with Spike and Bellator. But this is something clearly would not have happened under Bjorn Rebney's watch. And as I look at the UFC now, everything leads to something else. Every fight has a purpose. It's building to the next purpose. This, to me, I just have to sit back because I'm now removed from Bellator. Spike let me go in July, so I have a little bit of distance, a little bit more perspective. So I really have to ask the question, John, where do you go from here? This is a one-off fight, but whoever wins, what do you do with them other than this type of freak show or novelty fight? It's a valid promotional question.
Well, valid in some ways, but you have to look and be honest about what you have if you're Bellator compared to the big giant in the UFC. The UFC is going to do things their way because they're the biggest one out there. They have a gluttony of great fighters. Now, Bellator's got some great fighters, but they just don't have the depth, and no one does, and no one will for a long time, of what the UFC has. The UFC is stacked in their divisions in a fashion that, if you look at their top, at least 10 and sometimes down to 15 people in their weight class, anybody in that group could beat the other guy on a given day. And that allows them to do things in a way where they look at the sport as competition in who wants to be number one, who's going to be the guy. And that's what they're always basically, stacking their cards towards or building towards to get that fight that hopefully they can get where they get the two best guys getting into the cage and fighting. Well, if you're Bellator, as you talked about with Bjorn Rebney, when Bjorn Rebney was in charge of it, that's what he was basically trying to do all the time also. But he was doing it through the tournament. But as you look back and, you might be able to remember certain Bellators better than other people because you were there, but people don't remember those fights that occurred because they didn't care. So as the promoter for Bellator now, as the person in charge of it, Scott Coker's got to look and say, what are people going to put their eyes on? What are they going to care about? What are they going to start talking about? What is going to bring us to the point where people are also talking about us as a promotion? And what is going to help me in getting eyes on my young, talented fighters that I have that I want people to become interested in? So he's going about it in a different way, and he's doing the things like Kimbo Slice versus Shamrock, and now Gracie versus Shamrock, here in February it's going to come up. I guarantee you're going to see certain people on that card. I would guess someone like a Michael Page, MVP. I don't know for sure, but I would think that they want people to see him because he's exciting. He fights a certain way, and they want people to start to put their eyes on him. They're going to bring out, some of their good fighters and young fighters that they have that they want people to put their eyes on because the people are going to watch Kimbo and Dada, and they're going to watch Shamrock and Gracie. Well, if you're going to watch them, well, here's the, in the beginning, take a look at this kid, take a look at this fighter. They're using it as a promotion for the younger fighters, and in all honesty, it's called smart promoting.
John, I think you nailed it. When I was the commentator for Bellator last November, Tito Ortiz versus Stephan Bonner, the first of these really different philosophical type of fights and type of matchmaking under Scott Coker instead of Bjorn Rebney. But we had a feeling at the time at Bellator, it doesn't matter who wins. It matters how many people watch, and then they're exposed to these young Bellator fighters, these homegrown Bellator fighters who maybe they've just never seen before. In some cases, some very casual fans have never even heard of before. Biggest audience ever for Bellator is my second to last show. It was last June in St. Louis, Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock. Again, you have Michael Chandler fighting on that card. You're exposing people to other fighters who maybe they would not have seen. And I guess to answer my own question that I was posing, that's where you go from here. You go nowhere with 52-year-old Ken Shamrock and 49-year-old Royce Gracie. You go nowhere with Kimbo Slice. Where you go somewhere with are the young fighters who people are exposed to. Like it or not, this is going to get a big rating. And a lot of people don't like it, but this is going to get a big rating. And as you say, if it's Michael Chandler or Michael Page or Daniel Strauss, people are going to be exposed to these fighters because you and I still know a lot of people who call themselves hardcore MMA fans are really hardcore UFC fans. They just don't watch other promotions.
Exactly. And, you've got to do something that's going to get someone to turn their eyes from, just watching the UFC into watching your promotion. And it's working for them, no matter what anyone wants to say. You can take a look at this week's ratings. The Bellator show from St. Louis had a higher viewer rating than the UFC show from Sao Paulo, Brazil, with Dan Severn and Vitor Belfort. So, when Bellator is beating the UFC in ratings, they're doing something right. Something is, happening there. It doesn't mean that they're going to beat the UFC as far as overall, but on a given, weekend, you can look at differences. There's differences, Friday night to Saturday night and the amount of different types of sports that are on and other things. But all of it is, no matter what, it's a matchup, for that week. Bellator's doing something right when their ratings beat the UFC's ratings.
Every week here on Let's Get It On, we bring you our poll question. You can cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Last week we asked, do you agree with the 2-year suspension issued to Husamir Palhares by the Nevada State Athletic Commission? 82% of you voted yes. This week's poll question: will you watch the Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock fight in Bellator this February? Be honest. Vote yes or no on our website. We're not asking do you have a philosophical issue or a moral issue with this fight. We're asking will you watch? Vote yes or no on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. And, of course, we'll bring you the result on next week's program, first available on Friday. This is going to get big viewership. There is a lot of buzz right now. Now, you and I both know, John, it's negative buzz, but it's still buzz. And I think there's a school of thought that says negative buzz is better than no buzz at all.
I don't think it's all. I'm being honest. I've heard more positive buzz than I've heard negative. I hear people, they're telling me, they say, I can't wait to see that fight. It's like, really? It's just the way I look at it. It's like, okay, whatever, but they're all, I've always wanted to see them one more time. And it's like, okay, and so obviously, there's something out there, but I've actually heard more positive in people wanting to see it, liking the fact that someone is putting on fights with what they call masters. So now we're going to have the senior tour of MMA like we have in golf. But they said, I want to see these old guys fight again. I want to see Dan Severn back in there. I want to see Mark Coleman back in there. I said, yeah, Mark Coleman with his replaced hip. That's a good idea. But that's sometimes people can't let go. The one thing that I'll give Ken, he's always he's in good shape. He's able to at least look the part. Royce he's in great shape. I did see him in St. Louis, and I talked to him, and he's always in phenomenal shape. He has no injuries at all. He has nothing that is a lasting thing. He's always working out. He's always training. He's always teaching. So you look at the two guys. They can look the part. Can they play the part of the past? I'm not so sure about that. But, Royce has never been a dynamic athlete. He's just been someone that, technique-wise, he's used technique to beat, good fighters. And, he's going to try to do that again. Ken is going to try to, punch a hole in his head, I'm sure, because that's his way of winning. He's not going to submit him. He's not going to do anything in any fashion on the ground that he's going to beat Royce. So he's got to hurt Royce with punches while Royce is not going to be able to. I don't think he's still going to be able to hurt Ken with punches, but he's going to be able to submit him if he gets the opportunity. So it'll be interesting. What'll be interesting is, is there going to be the gi? Is that going to come back? Because I think in the state of Texas, and I'm sure that's part of the reason that this was put into Houston, I do think they have something where you can actually have a gi allowed in the competition if the opponent agrees to it, and I think Ken would agree to it because he wants something to hold on to. So it's there's a whole lot of things that you look at and you wonder what's going to happen with it. But hey, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Watching old people fight in a way to me is similar to watching old people fuck. It's I want to see it until you freaking do it, and then you go, why did I watch that? So I don't know. We'll see if that matches up to my statement.
Well, they fought as young people the first time. It was the very first UFC, November 12th, 1993. Gracie, of course, won by submission in 57 seconds. They then rematched at UFC 5, April 7, 1995. John, you were the referee. It ended in a draw after 36 minutes. Not a lot happened in that fight. It was pretty treacherously bad, actually.
Yeah, treacherously bad. I can still remember Bob Shamrock, because at the time we used to have a corner man up on the actual catwalk, and they had this little box that they would be in. And, Bob Shamrock at a certain point is, he's looking over at, Ken, and he's yelling, come on, Ken, do something. And Ken's just kind of holding on, And finally he says, well, if you're going to sit there and hug him, why don't you kiss him too? Right? Ken kind of picks his head up and looks at his dad like, did you just say that to me? And Royce looks at Ken and goes, please don't do that. And I was like, well, yeah, at least they're alive, but we'll see what happens in this one. I think this one, hopefully, actually might be better than the second. The first one was good.
It couldn't be worse.
The second one was horribly bad. And I think that, maybe this third one will be better than the second one. At least we've got to hope.
Well, Royce Gracie isn't the only big-name fighter who's in his 40s who began his pro MMA career in the 1990s and is now set for a comeback after a long absence. The new Japanese promotion, Rizin FF, has announced that 45-year-old Tsuyoshi Kosaka will be the opponent of 39-year-old Fedor Emelianenko, with the fight set for New Year's Eve. Kosaka does hold a highly controversial win over Fedor Emelianenko, which we're going to discuss in a moment, but has not fought since losing by second-round TKO versus Mark Hunt in Pride, May 2006. So, John, we talked about it on this program. Jagdeep Singh was originally set to be Emelianenko's opponent. He was then dropped due to near universal criticism. So
I told you that wasn't going to happen.
You were absolutely right. And the world spoke, and Rizin listened. Nobuyuki Sakakibara, the president of Rizin, felt we need a different opponent. He was looking long and hard, and he comes up with Tsuyoshi Kosaka. Again, very interesting. This will complete a trilogy, and you're pulling somebody out of 9.5 years of retirement.
Yeah, but you look and you say, well, I think Fedor's last fight was somewhere around 2012.
That's right.
And so he's been out for 3 years or so. So really, they've both been out a long time. So it's not like an advantage for one over the other. Tsuyoshi is such a good guy, and he does have the trilogy, but. You look at the trilogy, I think the first fight was somewhere around 2000.
Let's talk about that, because it's sort of one of those weird things that people are aware of, but nobody really understands what happened. And when I was commentating an Affliction, I would always, and then when I did Fedor's fight on the international broadcast when he fought Brett Rogers, I always felt compelled to explain away that one loss. So it was December of 2000. I know, John, you know this fight well. I know it well. You can find it. It's actually on YouTube. It's not blocked. You can find it on YouTube.
It's like 15 seconds long.
Excellent memory. 17 seconds. I watched it again last night. I've seen it a million times, but I watched it again last night just in preparation for the program. So for those of you who are vaguely aware of it but haven't seen it, so it's in the Old Rings promotion. It's part of a tournament. Elbows are illegal in this fight. So within the first 17 seconds, they're in the stand-up. Tsuyoshi misses his punch. He comes through and he lands an elbow on Emelianenko. He splits him open. Referee calls time. The fight doctor comes in, waves it off. Again, all elbow strikes were illegal. Now, Fedor Emelianenko doesn't seem hurt. He's cut, but he doesn't even seem rattled, stoic as always. Kosaka was given the victory by TKO because it was a tournament and they had to declare a winner. It was clearly a no contest in 999 out of 1,000 circumstances, but it's that weird sort of result. So Fedor Emelianenko, that was his first loss, and then he had that amazing unbeaten run. They rematched in Pride April 2006. Emelianenko absolutely battered Kosaka. It was the 10-minute one round, and after the opening round, the doctor stopped it, and Emelianenko was given the legitimate decision by TKO. So technically, yes, they're one win apiece, but realistically, it's tough to give Kosaka that win. Not to say he wouldn't have won, and he was an outstanding fighter, did very well in the UFC as well, did very well in Pride, but it's a really weird result.
Yeah, well, they both have TKO wins.
At the end of the day, they do.
But, what's funny is, it was a tournament format, and that is why they gave the win to Kosaka to move forward. But you look at it, if it was, a more rational head that was, the person in charge, you would have said, okay, we have a no contest and Tsuyoshi going to move forward as the only person that can continue to fight. But they gave him, they gave Fedor a loss. And it was the one thing that, for years I always said, he doesn't have a loss. That's not a loss. You don't lose on an illegal blow in the first, 15, 17 seconds of a fight. And that's going to be your lone loss. No, that's not a loss. You don't lose on something that's an illegal blow. But, it happened, and then he came back, and like you said, they had the rematch, and he beat the piss out of Kosaka in that 10-minute first round. It was not a pretty match. And you look at it now, and, they match up, as far as size, they match up perfectly. As far as age, they're getting close.
39 and 45, yeah.
Yeah, and, you look at it, as far as the one thing that, I've always said that, kills fighters when they come back is that speed difference. And, in this fight, Sakakibara has put somebody, against Fedor. Fedor has always lived on the fact that he was fast. People didn't realize how fast he was, and he caused other heavyweights problems due to his speed. Well, he's going to have a speed advantage the same as, in the past here, because he's slowing down, but Kosaka has slowed down. They're both in a position where they're older guys. So, this is a good thing overall for Rizin. It's a good fight for them. It's a good showcase for the guy that they really, even though, TK is the Japanese fighter, they want Fedor to win because he's going to be their meal ticket moving forward.
I guess if you compare what Scott Coker and Bellator are trying to do with Gracie versus Shamrock 3 and what Nobuyuki Sakakibar and Ryzen FF is trying to do with Kosaka Emelianenko 3, it seems to me, John, that Ryzen is really trying to build their promotion with Fedor Emelianenko, at least right now, as the flag bearer. Whereas we talked about with Bellator, it's about getting people who don't watch Bellator and have even never watched Bellator to watch a show and then say, you know what, this is a really good brand of fighting. They have some really talented stars. I think this is maybe even culturally different with Japanese MMA versus U.S. Canadian MMA, is that the Japanese audience is more willing. They showed it in Pride to accept those quote-unquote freak show type fights. I'm not saying this is a freak show type fight, but if they do throw on freak show type fights, I don't think you get all of the rolled eyes and hand-wringing and people talking about, wow, it's the death of the promotion, like you do over here. Because the UFC would be destroyed by their fan base if they made either of these fights.
Really?
I think they would.
Let's talk about CM Punk.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is where people sit there and
they are getting destroyed, though, John.
The UFC would never do this. Bullshit.
But they're getting destroyed. Okay. They are getting destroyed on CM Punk, and including from
they're
a lot
not
of the
getting destroyed. And how many eyes are no matter what everyone says, when Phil decides I'm healthy and I want to fight, I'm ready to do this. How many eyes are going to be on him when he finally steps into that cage? There's going to be a huge amount of people.
Absolutely.
Tuning in because they want to see either they're wrestling fans and they want to see how CM Punk does, or they want to see the wrestler lose. Whatever. Look at, sometimes as a promoter you got to do things that you think are going to draw interest. The UFC does it. They don't do it near as much as other promotions, and they're more of that straight sports lineage of who's the best, let's get the best fighter and everything. But they do this too. They did it with James Toney when they put him against Randy Couture.
That's really their last quote-unquote freak show fight, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. And, as soon as, people can sit there and say that, well, Brock Lesnar was too. Well, no, Brock brought in an amateur wrestling background that, kind of put him in a position he was different. But, you're going to have these times that you do things to, just get people's eyes on your promotion. And you're looking with the big difference here is, CM Punk in the UFC. The UFC doesn't expect anything out of him. If he loses, it doesn't matter. If he wins, great. Well, let's book him again. And then people now can see, hey, man, he can actually fight. So you have that. If you have Bellator with, Shamrock and Gracie, they're not counting on these guys to be the flag bearers of Bellator. They're counting on these guys to draw attention, to bring eyes so they can showcase new talent. If you're looking at Ryzen is different in the fact that they're riding the cape of Fedor. Similar as, and at least the one thing that they have going for them is, we know Fedor can fight. We know he is an exceptional fighter. Now, he's not going to be the fighter he was 10 years ago. You can't expect that of him. But he's still a guy that can go out there and he can beat most people. Not everybody, but most people. When you had someone like, Elite XC and they were riding the cape of Kimbo, that's when you really have a problem in the fact that Kimbo can throw hands, but he was so limited in the sport that they were trying to find people that he could beat. And that becomes the real problem for a promoter when you have a situation where you have to find a fighter out there that your guy can beat, because you need to continue to ride that wave that he's going to start to bring up. That's when you get yourself into trouble. That's when you're going to have, because you cannot predict fights. You could have the best fighter in the world and he could lose to a bad fighter on a given day. It just happens. One punch can change, an entire promotion. That's when you're in trouble. So, with what we have here, Ryzen is going to ride that cape of Fedor. I think they're right. I think he's got a name, especially throughout the Asian world. He's huge in Korea. He's huge in Japan. It's a guy that people love to watch. He's going to bring eyeballs on their promotion. That's what he's there for. And putting him against TK, that's a smart fight. That's a smart fight for them. A lot smarter than, Jadeep Singh, because you're losing semi-hardcores with the Jadeep Singh. Right. Hardcores are going to watch no matter what, but the semis are going to say, I don't want to watch it because it's not going to be competitive. But with TK has a name, and TK has been there with Fedor in the past. He's got two fights against him. There, you can call it the trilogy. It worked for you. It's smart promoting.
And to be clear, too, I'm not a fight snob. If Fedor Emelianenko fights Butterbean, and then in the other half of the bracket, it's Dada 5000 versus Kimbo Slice in the winner's advance, man, I'm watching it all because I am a fan. I might think this is an interesting promotional direction. I may not agree with it, not on a moral level, but philosophically on a promotional level, or I may agree with it, but I am going to watch because I'm a hardcore. And John, you're going to watch too. You'll probably be refereeing, but if you're not refereeing, you're going to be watching. And I guess there are probably people listening to this podcast who are saying, well, you guys are talking about older fighters. Well, what about Dan Henderson? And of course, Dan Henderson, he's 45, just knocked out by Vitor Belfort in Brazil last Saturday in the UFC. I guess the difference for me with 45-year-old Dan Henderson, Randy Couture, who fought until he was 47, Dan Severn, who fought until he was 53, is that they have stayed active in this sport. It's a difference for me if you're staying active, fighting 2, 3, 4 times a year, or in the case of Dan Severn, sometimes 6, 8, 10 times a year on the independent circuit, as opposed to coming back after these lengthy retirements of 5 years, 8.5 years, 9.5 years.
Yeah, there is a difference. But, when you're looking at it, I'd much rather see an old fighter against another old fighter in competition than I do, seeing that old fighter put in against the young fighter, so the young fighter can, he can beat up on the legend. He can take, supposedly, beat this guy and take that pelt, and now he's got that lion's mane on him. I'm not into that because I know what's going to happen. I know what the outcome of this, and I know it's not good for the older fighter in any fashion, because there comes that point as a fighter, there's different levels. But if you're a guy like a Dan Henderson, you have fought at the highest levels that this sport has. You have been, he was the rings king of king. He was Pride champion, multiple weight divisions. He was Strikeforce champion. The only thing he never won the championship, he won a tournament, but never won a championship in the UFC. And you look and you see a guy like that has all of these accomplishments and has done so much in the sport. And now you see where, they're starting to put him in, and they'll put him in against guys that they're trying to build their name. And that's what I don't like to see. That's what's hard for me. That's when I look at it and it's like, I'd rather see him retire. I don't want to see him get put out to slaughter because they're just trying to use his name to build somebody else.
Every week on this podcast, John and I answer your questions. Ask away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, and on Twitter by using the hashtag AskBJM. And, of course, please include a pronunciation guide for your name. First up, John, Jacob Clark. This is a really intriguing question to me, and I'm going to add a little bit to his question just to round it out. So Jacob asks, who is the one fighter you've never refereed that you would love to referee? And what I'll add, John, is past and present. Because present, it's probably you've hit just about everybody. But what about in the past? Or it can be a present fighter too, but I think it's interesting.
Oh, my God.
Or maybe one of each era.
You know what? If there was a guy from the past, he's just recently from the past that I worked around a lot, had a great relationship with, loved how much he did in the sport. The guy that I would have to pick out would be Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira.
Yeah.
He was a guy, I never refereed him.
That's shocking. That really is amazing, isn't it?
I always had huge respect for who he was, the way he handled himself, and what he accomplished in the sport. That was a guy that, I could say I've never refereed him and would have loved to. Currently in the sport, man, I don't know. I haven't. Let's see. God, I don't know. That's a tough one. It really doesn't matter to me. That's why it's really tough. It's, what I get to referee, I'm happy with. If I don't referee someone, okay, it's no big deal. I would say it'll be. I have not done. Let's go over champion wise. I've not refereed Chris Weidman, so that would be someone that would be a person I'd like to referee. I've not refereed. Go down the champion list again. Interim champion, not referee Conor McGregor yet, so that would be an interesting one to do. I would say those two would be it.
Next question, it comes from the excellent MMA and pro wrestling writer Eric Holden. He asks, John, are referees allowed to give fighters a hand up between rounds? Now, we see it, but he's asking, are they allowed? Two very different things.
When you say between rounds, between rounds is, the fighting competition is in it. But as a whole, I will help a fighter up if it's the end of the fight. That's the only time that I'll give them a hand and help them. If the fight's over, I'll give them a hand and help them up. Other than that, it's the fighter's responsibility to get themselves to where they need to be. And in any fashion that someone could look at and say, I'm giving an advantage to one fighter, I don't want that to happen during the fighting competition. So I would say that most of the time, most referees are going to tell you, do not help the fighter up. In some small way, you're giving an advantage to that fighter over the other in energy and just, getting them a little bit of help. People are going to look at it as an advantage, so we don't do it.
And you and I was alluding to this a moment ago asking Eric's question, have seen referees at the end of a round or even in a reset period where they order a stand-up. And we've seen referees, even high-level referees, help fighters up. It drives me crazy. It's against the rules, and I think it's giving an advantage, and I think they just have no business interjecting themselves there. As you're saying, when you do after the fight, once the bell rings, that's the end of the fight. The fight is over. So that's no different from helping them up in their dressing room or later if you see them in the hotel.
Yep.
But during the fight, that drives me crazy.
Yeah, these are the little things that people look at and they go, oh, well, that doesn't matter. And then other people go, I can't believe you did that. And so you just try to make it to where, hey, you just try to be as fair as you can to be both fighters.
John, I was mentioning to you off air when I was a pretty active boxing referee in my 20s and I took Mills Lane's course and I got to know Mills really well. He said, I try to touch the fighters as little as possible. And it drove him crazy on a slip that the referees, even the high level in world title fights, on boxing slips, the referees would help fighters up. He was really against that, and that seeped into my brain. And I know you have that similar philosophy.
Yeah, and but you'll get other philosophies and you'll get other people saying, oh, it doesn't matter, because they do it. And you look and you go, well, it doesn't matter to you, and that's fine, but everyone that watches you thinks, why are you doing that? And so you just got to look and say, as Mill says, if I can't say it, as little contact as I can have with the fighter as possible makes it best. And so that's what we kind of go by.
Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On. Oh, get ready. This is going to be fun. As we're going to mark the 22nd anniversary of the first UFC, November 12th, 1993, with Art Davie. John and I will speak candidly with the great Art Davie, who, of course, is the creator of the UFC. And, John, how long have you known Art Davie? For years, right? Since 91, 92? This is going to be fun. This is going to be really fun. So Art Davie.
Art is special, man. You know what? It's great that we're going to have him on. He is the one thing that I loved about Art, man, energy. Art was always full of energy, full of boulder dash, man. He could lay it on thick as anybody. People are going to get a very good taste of what Art Davie is, because it took someone special to come up with bringing MMA as a sport to the world, and he's the guy that did it.
UFC creator Art Davie is heading your way with Big John McCarthy. I'm Sean Wheelock, and you are listening to Let's Get It On.
Hey guys, if you're a fan of Let's Get It On and want to show us some love and support our podcast, before your next Amazon purchase, go to our website at letsgetitonpodcast.com and click the Amazon banner on the right-hand side of the page. It doesn't cost you anything, and there are no extra steps to go through. But doing this supports the podcast and allows us to continue to bring you great content every week. Remember, before you shop on Amazon, go to our website at letsgetitonpodcast.com and click the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. Thanks a lot.
Let's Get It On is presented by Audible.com. Audible is now offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go online to audibletrial.com/letsgetiton. Again, that is audibletrial.com/letsgetiton for your free audiobook. Be sure and join me for the 2015 Legends of MMA Hall of Fame Fan Expo and Awards Ceremony on Saturday, November 21st at Sportsman's Lodge Event Center in Studio City, California. There'll be training seminars hosted by Jeremy Horn, Don Fry, Dan Severin, and Kenya Suda, and autograph signings with Pat Miletich, Mark Coleman, Don the Dragon Wilson, UFC founder Art Davie, and many more. And the night will conclude with the Hall of Fame inductions of Kazushi Sakuraba, Matt Hughes, Chuck Liddell, Judo Gene LaBelle, and Elio Gracie. You can purchase your tickets right now online at legendsofmma.com. Again, that's legendsofmma.com. The 2015 Legends of MMA Hall of Fame Fan Expo and Awards Ceremony, Saturday, November 21st at Sportsman's Lodge Event Center in Studio City, California. I'll see you there.
When looking for new and exciting clothing concepts, look no further than Lambs to Lions. Lambs to Lions has great designs that incorporates the past from boxing with the new and exciting evolution of MMA. We all start out as lambs, but with time, training, and hard work, we can all become lions. Be part of the Lambs to Lions movement and check out all of their great designs. You can get your Lambs to Lions gear at the Las Vegas Fight Shop or go to lambstolionsbrand.com.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
This week marks the 22nd anniversary of the first UFC, which took place November 12, 1993 at McNichols Arena in Denver, Colorado. John, you were, of course, there, not as the referee, but as one of the main training partners of Hoist Gracie. Your wife, Elaine, was there. She served as the travel coordinator for the event. I was watching live at home in Shawnee, Kansas, as my mom thankfully paid the $14.95 for the pay-per-view broadcast, which both of you know, it's a sad reflection of my life. I have saved that original VHS recording off of Viewers' Choice pay-per-view. And, of course, Art Davie was there in Denver witnessing his dream become a full reality after 4 years of nonstop work. So pleased to be joined now by one of my really closest friends in the world, the great Art Davie. Art, thanks for being on the program. We've been talking about this. We wanted to get you on, but we wanted it to be a special occasion, and here we are at the 22nd anniversary.
Well, Sean, 22 years ago, and it seems like in some respects at least 50 years ago at this point. But 22 years ago, we really caught some lightning in a bottle. And like you said, there you were at home watching this thing on pay-per-view. And that's the reason why this thing clicked, was that we connected very early on with a whole bunch of people who got what this thing was about. And it's only grown since then.
Yeah, it's only grown just a little bit. Just a small little skosh. I like that. It's grown a little bit. The way I look at it, and I kind of said it when I wrote the thing for your book, Sean, with Art, is when you're someone like Art, you get a chance sometimes to affect people's lives. And if you affect one person's life and make their life better or different, you've done something. And you take a look at what Art you have accomplished through what you had as an idea and what you worked hard for to make happen. The amount of people's lives that you have affected in a positive way is amazing. And congratulations, you did something that most people will never have even a clue of what you've done to make other people's lives better.
Well, John, thank you for that. That's very generous. And your introduction of the book was really magnificent, because you went above and beyond the call of duty to give me a lot of credit. What I do feel, though, John, is that I was lucky. A big part of what happened for me was luck. I was in the right place at the right time.
Hello. Meet John McCarthy.
And there you were, Big John. In fact, the story is that you were back in the academy. You were still a sworn officer with the LAPD at the time. And, it wasn't until UFC 2 that we had to turn to you and needed you to come on board and provide some rationality and some control in the area of referees. As you remember, the problem we had with the first UFC's referees is they were Portuguese. It was a little bit of fish out of water. I had wanted Judo Gene LaBelle. I really did. And, Horion had some strong feelings about Gene, but having you there, very strong feelings, and he still does. I remember at the 20th anniversary show, they're looking at the UFC 167. Horian and I had a conversation about Gene. But it was really, when you go back and look at the history of the early event, there were some people who were part of it, like you, who are still involved in MMA. And, you at the time were John, were you a purple belt at the time of the first UFC?
I want to say it was a blue belt. I think it was a purple belt at the second one. So I think it was a blue belt at the first one.
Now, you were also a workout partner for Royce Gracie at UFC 1, right?
Yep.
In fact,
go ahead.
Right? Well,
Yeah.
John, what I remember was that Horion had kept even me away from Royce that week. He was like the ghost. Actually, you were one of the few people, along with the Gracie brothers, who was with Royce or saw Royce or interacted with Royce. Tell us a little bit about that. Were you rolling with him?
Yeah, we were going. I can't remember the name of the gym that we were at, but it had a boxing ring that we were rolling in at times. We were actually taking in. Sometimes we were in the room. We would just move all the furniture, take the bed, put the bed up against the wall, and we were rolling inside of the hotel room and stuff. But we were just going to the one gym that they had, and he would do some running, and we would do a little bit of sparring there and stuff, stand up a little bit, him shooting in, and then we did stuff at the hotel room and stuff. But it was we were there. He actually went there, I want to say 2 weeks before the fight.
That's correct.
And I got there about 8 days before the fight because I didn't have the ability to take that kind of time off from work.
Sure.
So the whole thing was, to try to get him used to the elevation, because it was in Denver, and we knew that the elevation was going to be a little bit of a problem for people because you start to wear out quick if you're not used to it. So that was the whole point, is to get him up there, to get him used to it.
John, it was really crazy. We put it in our book, Is This Legal? The secrecy. You have to think, Art's not only the creator, but now he's one of the two main principals, along with his business partner, Horian Gracie. You're the matchmaker, Art. You're running the entire show, and yet your business partner, Horian, won't let you see his kid brother train. You can't even get in that hotel room at the Executive Tower in Denver. I guess the Gracies really did close ranks. The only outsider there was you, Big John.
I was the only dummy. Only dummy allowed.
Now, John, let me ask you this, though. Given your size, and, at 6'4", at the time you probably weighed 285, right?
Oh, yeah, 295, 300.
295, 300. Had they recruited you, Horian and Hickson recruited you because your size was a factor and they knew Royce was going to be facing some big guys?
Oh yeah, that was definitely the whole thing. Is I think at the time, on your thing you had, I think Kevin Rozier was listed at 265. I think
we say he's 325 in the book.
Let's not talk about what he actually showed up at.
Right.
But what was on the thing, I think, was 265. But then you also had, the sumo wrestler, and Taylor Tooley was one that, was a possibility. And, he was 400 and some pounds. So, yeah, part of the reason, they used me was because of size. And, we would roll with two people getting ready for the sumo. We would actually put me and another guy on top of Royce. It was kind of weird, but the whole thing was to get him used to weight. How much weight, and make them feel stuff. So we had no idea who was going to end up where. All we knew, at a certain point, we knew he was fighting Art Jimerson. We knew he was fighting the boxer first, and that whole thing was, I would do things in, acting like the boxer and coming after him with jabs and movement to get him used to being able to have that timing to shoot in at the right time.
Speaking of Art Jimerson, and Art, you go ahead. So Art Davie and I were at an MMA fan fest. We were invited guests in Syracuse, New York, about 6 weeks ago, and one of the people there is Art Jimerson, and he had some interesting things to say about you, John. Right, Art?
Yeah,
let's hear
it. Well, Big John, Jimerson, has told the story in different ways over the years, and as Sean likes to say to me, Jimerson has a creative grasp of the past at this point, a creative grasp. And he was actually telling me that it was you who, right before the fight, had kind of spooked him. But I remember that you and I talking at the Hall of Fame last year in Reno, and you told me that it was early on in the week that you had actually been rolling a little bit with Jimerson and had given him the understanding of what it would be like to be taken down to the ground, and then you kind of mounted him and put your big fist in his face. But that happened during the week, according to you. Isn't that right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. That was probably about 3 or 4 days before the actual show. And, my wife had that table because she was working for you but she had that table for Horian Jiu-Jitsu where it was the Bra-Jitsu and thing that there was the people, and she had their tickets and their tickets for the fight, tickets for the party afterwards, all the different stuff, and they were coming up, and I had just gotten done working out with Royce, and I came down to see her, and I was standing there talking to her, and up walked Art Jimerson, his wife, and Ernest Hart. And Ernest Hart, right? And he started, talking because they were getting the tickets and stuff from my wife, and he started talking. He said, and he looked at me. He goes, "You're with my opponent." And I said, "Yeah, I am," and didn't think anything of it. And he said, and he started flicking out a jab. He said, "What's he gonna do?" When boom, boom, and he starts throwing out the jab, and I go. And I went through the whole thing. Well, what are you going to do? I said, how many times do you clinch in a boxing match? What are you going to do when there's no rule against it?
Right.
And I don't remember why, but there was this little, banquet room kind of thing area that was off to the side. And, I said, come on. And we went in there. I said, I'll tell you, you try to hit me with your jab. You can hit me, and I'll try to take you down, and we'll see, if you can keep that distance. And he says, okay. And as soon as he flicked out his jab, one time I shot in and took him down. I mounted him, and I was over the top of him, and I said, this is what's going to happen. And he looked at me, and the first thing out of his mouth was, he's going to break my arms and legs, isn't he? and I was like, no, all you got to do is tap out. Right? And when that fight took place, and the way it took place, and it was the one time that I was, I'm not that sheepish and I'm not that shy about a lot of things, but that fight took place, and he taps out when Royce is just, mounted on top of him, same position I had him in, right? Except he didn't even come up. And Horian, is looking, and he looks straight at me, and he gave this look like, what was that? And I gave this look like, I don't know, because I was like, oh, I fucked that up. That's because of me, man.
So Jimerson in Syracuse, John, tells Art and myself that when Royce was mounting him, he thought that either you or some of the Gracie brothers had jumped into the cage and were holding his legs because he thought, why can I not get this little skinny 170-pound man off of me? He literally thought that there was like the whole Gracie clan plus you pinning his legs down.
Yeah, no. Art, let's be honest. There was a fight that Art did not want to be part of, and that was it. He did not want to be there. And that was, it's bad when you go in, knowing, I don't want to be here, because you're shooting yourself in the foot. You can't win that fight.
Art, when we were in Syracuse, and John, I think you'll enjoy this. So we had a screening. There were 4 of the original 10 who were there, and we had a screening for fans. We actually took my VHS copy, I burned it to DVD, and that's key because what most people have seen is what Vidmark Home Entertainment put out 2 years later in 1995. They take out the alternate fight with Trent Jenkins and Jason DeLucia. They fix a lot of mistakes. Most of the Bill Wallace hysterical gaffes, which we document in the book, were taken out. So it's a sanitized version of it. They changed some camera angles. So I have the real thing. So we did a screening, and Art, you and I are sitting there together, and you commented to me, well, you go ahead and tell it, but your reaction, having not watched that original broadcast in a lot of years.
Well, it really looks kind of raw, and compared to the current
You said
UFC,
cheesy, come on.
I did use the word cheesy, yes.
I think you were right, it did.
Yeah. Well, it goes to show you how things have evolved. In fact, I was looking at some posts on my Facebook page. Some people have made posts, relative to the fact that today is the 22nd anniversary. And, quite frankly, it does look cheesy. But then again, so much has evolved. And as I've told in various interviews when we started last year to promote the book, early on, I had written the rules for the first event, and as Sean knows, on my blue IBM typewriter. But very quickly, the guy that I went to in terms of discussing and evolving the rules was you, John. And later on, Jeff Blatnick was a factor. But I think the fans should know to what extent, right from the earliest days, you were a factor in evolving the rules for the UFC.
Oh, you know what? I always looked at it. I was just lucky to be where I was at and being able to work with you. Because I used to, people have no idea, but, where the Gracie Academy was, your office was, right out the back door across the street.
Right.
That was the WOW office. And so
yeah,
I would go from working out, or if my kids were working out, because my son was so bad at if I was standing there watching him, he wouldn't look at what he was doing. He'd always just try to look at me. So I would go talk to Art. And so there was some funny things that occurred over the time we were there. Think about Dave Thomas calling with Tank Abbott.
Yes.
And I was sitting in the room, and that's how you came up with Tank. Is I said, oh, so he's like Tank Murdoch of Every Which Way But Loose, right?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
We had some great conversations and things that back then didn't seem like anything that turned out to be something later on.
Hey, John, let me go back to something though. You were in the room with Hoist that week that he was getting ready to do the inaugural event. Hickson was there as his primary trainer. Isn't that correct?
Yep.
And now later on, by UFC 3, Hickson is gone from Hoist's corner, and Hoist doesn't seem to have the same resolve and the same gumption that he had, in a sense, in the first two UFCs. What was the atmosphere like, and what was Hickson doing with Hoist? Can you tell us a little bit about that situation? Because you were right there at elbow's length.
The whole thing was Hickson was great with Hoist because he gave Hoist a confidence. He explained fighting to Hoist. The one thing that was sad about the whole thing is there was a certain point where Hoist he didn't break down, but he felt bad, and he felt bad that he was the guy that was going to do this, and it wasn't his brother Hickson, because he knew that Hickson was the better fighter.
Right.
He knew that Hickson was the guy, and he knew that Hickson had been talked about. He was the guy that was going to do this, and he knew the reasons why, Hickson was, put out to the side and he was brought in. Yeah. And he felt very bad as far as his relationship with Hickson, and that Hickson was there for him when it should be, in his opinion, Hickson fighting. And so that was a thing that occurred, and it was even in your book. And I tried to explain it to Sean, because Sean had it in a way where you were looking at it where he was unsure about the fight and he was unsure about himself, and it wasn't that at all. He felt bad for Hickson. He felt bad that Hickson wasn't going to be able to showcase himself.
Well, Art, we put in the book, and to your point, Sean, that all along you were the matchmaker and Rorion Gracie left you alone to find the fighters, but it was the understanding that Rorion was going to pick the Gracie representative for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. You just assumed in the default position it had to be Hickson. You didn't even consider anyone else. And it's one of my favorite lines that we put in the book. You said that when you saw Hickson working out with Hoist, it was about as competitive as when you did your privates with Hoyle or Gracie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as you know, John, and I was there at a couple of those training sessions with Hickson early on a morning, 6:30. There was some, I think, I'm trying to remember the police lieutenant, Bob Augustine from Torrance. Was in that class. Yeah. Hickson's exercise class, for fans out there.
His exercise class would kill you.
45 minutes I left. One-legged squats I couldn't do when I was in the Marines. I mean, so Hickson was at another level. And I tell the story that up until August, I thought it was going to be Hickson. In fact, the first fighter I had signed was not Hoist Gracie. A lot of fans say to me, but wasn't Hoist the very first? No, it was Pat Smith. Pat Smith, when I had gone to Denver and I hooked up with Karen Turner, he had won the Sabaki Challenge that year. He was the first fighter signed. It wasn't until late in the summer that Rorion finally told me, it's not going to be Hickson. It's going to be young Hoist.
Amazing. And you went, why?
Ooh, really? I said, he's the guy who babysits your kids. So for me, it was a big shock. But, I think it's really interesting that we now hear from Bellator last week that on February 19th, there's going to be a Gracie Shamrock 3. And, of course, you won't have Hickson in his corner,
No, but he'll have Hoyler.
He'll have Hoyler. But here we look, is Hoist is what, 49 now, John?
He'll be 49. He's 48. Yeah, he will be 49 right at the time of the fight.
Yep. And Shamrock is what, 51 or 52?
He's 51, and he'll be 52 at the time of the fight.
And he looked a little older fighting Kimbo in St. Louis a few months ago, didn't he?
You think.
Yeah. You think. So, John, do you have any feelings and thoughts about, because you were there from the very beginning, what is your take on this business of Bellator now bringing in these retired UFC stars as kind of maybe a marketing ploy to attract more viewership and attention? And what do you think about it for the fans in terms of bringing someone like Hoist and Shamrock back?
I think that there was this guy named Art Davie that I used to jump on all the time about, Art, why are you doing that fight? And I think Art right now is just like needling me going, oh, remember? Yeah. What is this? because it was, it was funny because you used to do fights. I go, Art, are you kidding me? What are you thinking, right? And he goes, no, this is going to be great. This is going to be great, right? And I look at this fight, and it's, again, two guys that way past their prime, too old to actually, be competitive. But at least against each other, I don't have a problem with this one. And again, I tell, I said it earlier, watching old people fight is like watching old people fuck. You think it's going to be great until you see it. And that's might be what happens with this one. Well, that's just the truth. But you know what? With these two, it's almost understandable. And it's almost in a way because of, the first matchup, Royce, caught him easy. The second one was that super fight that you set up. In fact, Art's the reason, that fight went to 36 minutes, being the longest fight in UFC history, is because we didn't have a bell and we didn't have a horn. We didn't think about it at the time. We figured, it'll finish. And so at the I want to say it was at the 31-minute mark, Art is waving there telling me, John, stop the fight. Stop it. It's got to go to overtime. And so I end up stopping the fight at like 31 minutes. I mean, what was it? 30 minutes or something. But 31 minutes and 5 seconds or so. And then we did a 5-minute overtime. And that's when Ken ended up hitting Royce and actually, hurting him a little bit. Yep. But ended up a draw. So in some ways, hey, Ken's always said he won that fight. Did he win the fight? No, it was a draw. But it'll be interesting in the last one.
John, you and I have talked about this. Sorry, Art. We're going to set you up for a compliment here. But John, you and I have talked about this plenty of times on the show. We've talked about it plenty of times in our private life together, that Art Davie had the knack for finding fighters that weren't necessarily great fighters. I think David Tank Abbott's the absolute best example, but that people remember. It's amazing how many people who have no idea really what MMA is or even what MMA stands for, who have this awareness of Tank Abbott. And people talk about Emmanuel Yarbrough, who we saw in Syracuse, and people will remember Taylor Tooley. And you had the knack, I guess we wrote about it in your whole philosophy of sharks and goldfish of promoting Art, but you had the knack for finding not the best athletes or the best fighters, but the best characters, and then matching them accordingly to build heat.
Well, I was a great student, I'd like to think, of boxing. And I like to tell the story that, when Jack Dempsey came along, there were a lot of great fighters at the time. And Dempsey had been knocked out by fireman Jim Flynn. There were a lot of great African-American fighters who, because of the cultural and race attitudes at the time, were not permitted to step forward and compete for the heavyweight championship. Harry Wills, Sam Langford. So I understood that a great promoter like Tex Rickard, his job was to find not only a fighter who could fight, maybe not even the best fighter, but a fighter who ignited the public's passion and involvement. Your job in sports promotion is entertainment. So I always felt that I had a pretty clear idea about that. Sometimes John would give me a hard time and say, why are you bringing this big bagunza in? But in a way, I always felt like my primary goal, given the fact that I was a marketing and advertising guy by training, was to find fighters that the public could identify with. I remember when I brought Tank Abbott in through the front entrance at Buffalo, and Bob Meyerowitz was standing octagon side, and by the time I had walked Tank all the way to the octagon perimeter, the audience had gone wild. Guys were pulling up their shirt. They had painted TANK on their respective torsos. People were screaming. When I got to the octagon, Bob turned to me and said, Tank Abbott is the male Roseanne. He's off the charts. It's true.
You know what? What's funny is I can remember Tank. I remember the phone call with Dave Thomas, and then you brought Tank to the UFC 5.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, the true story on that is that there he is knocking on Bob's door that night, drunk, and they had similar numbers for their rooms, but they were on different floors, 1210 and 9 and 1110. And Bob and his wife are panicked. They're calling security. Bob calls me, says some nutcase is pounding on my door. It was Tank, totally snockered on vodka and pounding on Bob's door. This is the guy he didn't want me to put in as the pit fighter. The next event in Casper, I put him in, and of course he gets to the final.
John, were you serving as Art's moral compass on matchmaking in the early UFCs?
I was always the guy going, are you kidding me? What are you doing bringing this guy? And he's going, this is going to be great. when he did the one that I think he really wanted to kill me on was the David versus Goliath.
Yes.
One that he was going to do in Puerto Rico and stuff. And there was some fighters in there. I go, are you shitting me? Art, come on, man. What are you doing? And one of them was Gary Goodrich, because I knew Gary from arm wrestling.
Yeah.
And I was like, he can't fight. He's not a fighter. And, boy, did I learn a lesson, because he put him against Paul Herrera. And I thought, if Paul ends up shooting in on him, he's going to take him down. And I learned a lesson. Don't think you know what you don't know. And there was a whole lot of guys. There was the poor taxi cab driver from Puerto Rico, Thomas Ramirez.
Yes.
That poor man, you put him against Don Fry. And Art would always go with this guy is a Penchak Salat. This guy is this. Oh, hey, let me tell you, this guy told me what he can do, right? And I'm like, he can't do that. Why are you sitting there? But I just
John,
loved it.
John, Sean, you're right. John was my moral compass, not only on matchmaking, A, but B, John was also my moral compass when it came to the evolution of the rules. And yet, let me point out, John, that when you look at the history of the UFC's pay-per-view numbers, and Dave Meltzer over at the Wrestling Observer has done a damn good job of chronicling those. You look at 300,000 buys for UFC 2 and 300,000 buys for UFC the David and Goliath tournament in Puerto Rico, and the Zuffa organization didn't do 280,000 until Couture and Liddell, and that's years later in a universe with 100 million homes when we only had 35 million homes at the time. So having Ramirez versus Fry, having
Ferrozo versus Bolander.
Yeah. I still say that I had a good feeling, given the talent available at the time, for creating that kind of controversy. But going back to UFC 5, John, that overtime, do you remember me yelling and waving at you to stand them up?
No, I don't remember you yelling to stand them up. I remember you telling me to, stop it. There needs to be the overtime. And so I stopped at that point. I think we gave them a minute's rest and then put them back for a 5-minute overtime.
Well, the reason why I say that is that I can see it on the tape, and I see you looking over at me because I'm telling you to stand them up. Rorion to this day blames me for that shot that Royce took because he felt that I had gotten you to stand them up. And quite frankly, if people thought that Ken won that bout, it's because of that shot in the overtime round. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can go back and I can remember so many different things occurred during that time, but it was I do remember, and maybe it was you were telling me to stand up, and we stopped it from that point. But
yes,
the other one that I recall for Art was there was a fight with Dan Severn and Oleg Taktarov.
Yes,
and it was bloody. It was Dan ended up dropping a knee on Oleg's face while he was on the ground, and Art at a certain point was waving, "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!" I'm like, I'm not stopping this. It was the first time I saw Art Davie squeamish. I was the bad guy. He was the good guy.
Interesting.
Art.
Hey, John.
Go ahead, Art, please.
John, you also, I think the fans might be interested to know that you had another job in UFC 1 too, didn't you? You had kind of a certain role as a kind of a protector, as a kind of a bodyguard. Do you want to talk a little? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I don't think a lot of fans know that story.
That was you know that whole story very well because Rorion was a hated person by the Gracie family. There was all the Gracies outside of his brothers, and even that at the time, even some of his brothers, being Hickson, was a little upset with him. But Rorion owned the Gracie name and the trademark and the triangle, that symbol that came from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and there was family members that were using it, and he was suing. And they were all pissed off at him. And so when we went to, we went to Denver, Rorion, before I went, told me, he says, I need you to be around me. I need you to help me. And, I have certain family members, they might try to do something. In fact, I think, one of them is going to bring a gun. He says, I need you to bring your gun. I go, you need to bring a gun? Right? He goes, yes. He says, he's crazy. He'll try to shoot. He'll try to kill me. Right. And so I was armed. When I wasn't training with Royce, I actually had a I think a Beretta 92F at the time was sitting there with me at the time. It was, concealed, but he was worried about, his cousin, Hyulsen, doing something.
Carlos's oldest son, right?
Yeah, that's Carlos's oldest son. And Carlos's oldest son, he was pissed because he had Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I think it was in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Where he had school. And he was very, he's a good guy. I liked him when I finally got to meet him and stuff, But he was a guy that said, they tell you lies and stuff, and he started bringing out a bunch of different stuff. But at the time, Rorion was sure that Hyulsen was going to try to come kill him.
Art, go ahead, Art, and then I'll ask you something.
I was going to say also about that time and the fact that you were armed. Didn't I also give you the sticky, dirty job of protecting and guarding the medal that we awarded Royce?
Yeah, you gave me the stupid medal it was a nice medal. I'm not saying that, but I had to hold on to the stupid box the entire night, and protect this thing because, it was going to the winner of the fight.
Right.
And it was, I was so bad as I kept on, because I was going in the back and stuff. And I was at a certain point, I actually handed it to my, hold on to this. Take it back. Right. And it's like, I'm a horrible bodyguard when it comes to property.
Hey, John, I figured, though, at 6'4" and 290, armed with a Beretta 92F, I figured you were good.
Art, I know that recently you were inducted into the MMA Legends Hall of Fame. I was inducted on the same night, so that was kind of special. But the UFC now has certain categories for fighters. They have modern day pioneer, which is really good because some of the guys that you brought into the sport are being, given the opportunity to be part of that Hall of Fame, which is a great thing. But one of the things is a contributor section. And I want to know, do you think there's a possibility UFC 200 coming up, you might be the guy put into the contributor section of the UFC? And what would that mean to you?
Well, I think it would be a big thrill for me. I was pleased that they invited me to the 20th anniversary show in November 16th of 14. And I would be thrilled, I think, if I got a call from Dana or from Lorenzo. I know that last year they inducted Jeff Blatnick, and his widow was there for the presentation. And that made sense to me when I heard about it. Jeff was a great guy who made a great contribution, not only in MMA, but in wrestling. And I think that if I did get a call, John, about this, I think it would be a great thrill. Certainly a number of my people I know in the business in MMA feel that I had a seminal role.
Just a little bit.
Just a little.
Only the creator.
And quite frankly, for me, it would be a great thrill. I've gotten a little closer to the UFC. They've been a little more accessible, and they now have the book they're acquiring for the online store. And quite frankly, a number of their management people have read the book. Ant Evans, Marshall Zelaznik, Mark Ratner. So I think it would be a great thrill for me to answer your question if I did get the call. Absolutely, especially if it's close to the 200th anniversary coming up. That would be a big deal.
I think it's well deserved. I think that's something that needs to happen.
Thank you, John.
Arden, you mentioned the book, and you and I sold the option. It's being developed as a major motion picture. And, John, when I was telling you and your wife, Elaine, this, I said, well, who can play John? She said, John can play John. He hasn't aged in 22 years. But Elaine was serious, which is why your marriage works. I thought that was beautiful. But, Art, it's exciting. I mean, you're more worldly than I am. After all, you invented the UFC. But for a kid from Shawnee, Kansas, to be mixed up with some film people, it's a pretty exciting time for us.
Well, I think that it's a good story. It was a ship of fools. We had people came together in MMA and in Semaphore, myself, and John McCarthy and all the great fighters. And I dedicated the book, as you know, to them. We dedicated the book to those 10 guys. I think it would make a great film, if only because in the spirit of Moneyball and the Social Directory, I think there's a drama there. There's conflict, and then there's the great excitement of having that first event and those 10 guys put their reputations on the line and show what they can do. And as we've talked about with the producers, you've got Kevin and Taylor in a way that on some level before the event were kind of a bit of comic relief. You got Art Jimison in the same view, the same mode. You've got Zane Fraser, the jailhouse lawyer who takes over the fighters meeting. You know, John knows all this, and I think as a film, I think this could be really exciting. Legacy Film Partners is excited about the fact that they think it could be, given the worldwide market for MMA, conceivably be a successful theatrical film. So we'll see what happens. But as I always tell fans, hey guys, it took 10 years for Forrest Gump to become a major motion picture. So we'll see how long it takes to get Is This Legal to the screen. But it's got a great cast of characters. Arnold Schwarzenegger makes an appearance in the book.
John
so
Milius.
Chuck Norris, John Milius. Hey, and John McCarthy. So there you go, folks.
Somehow. All right, here's my last question. You know, there's no doubt. I tell everyone, anyone asks me a question, who created the UFC? Art Davie. There's no doubt you're the guy that did it. You're the one that had the idea. You're the one that did the legwork. You're the one that put in all the hard work to get things done. But I keep on hearing about this other guy out there that is a co-creator. Tell me about your feelings on this.
You know, John, in the film,
this is called being a shit starter.
Even this is where I even get wound up.
Exactly. Yeah, you know how to do this, John. But you know, in the film, conceivably, he could be played by a Patton Oswalt. As an example. You know, Campbell was a graduate of Berkeley, but he was the vice president of acquisitions at Semaphore Entertainment. And when I had been turned down by HBO and Showtime and ESPN, Campbell was the guy. Campbell McLaren was the guy who said, "Hey, I think this thing is great." He said, "Come to New York right away." But Campbell was an employee over Entertainment. He was the creator. I had the idea. I packaged it. I had to sell it to everybody, including the two other founders, Rorion Gracie and Bob Marowitz. There were three founders to the UFC, the three principals. I had to sell it to the other two guys, and both of them were hard sales. You know, it took me a year and a half to get Rorion on board. I didn't want to do the Gracie challenges. You know, I wanted to do something bigger on pay-per-view as a tournament. And Bob Marowitz, when he first heard about it, said, "Look," he said, "I could have been the first Jewish heavyweight boxing champ. I know fighting. But he said, I don't know all this Mugu guy Pan stuff that you guys are better." So it was a tough sale. But Campbell, I love, now goes around and sort of, I guess to increase his street cred, he sort of takes a lot of the credit that some people feel belongs to me. And I don't think anybody has a stronger feeling about that, even more so than I do, than you. I think you get upset every time Campbell opens his mouth.
I hate when people are full of shit. Okay, you sit there and you sit, you know, it's as simple as it gets. Did he have a major part? He did. You know what? And it was you bringing an idea that he looked at and bought into and said, you know what? Yeah, he absolutely is the reason that Semaphore became involved with it and it got on pay-per-view with Semaphore. No doubt about it. I mean, I'm all about giving credit where it's due. But man, I cannot stand when someone takes credit for something they did not do. And Campbell McLaren was about as close to coming up with a fighting sport and a fighting contest or a show as he was in discovering frickin' plutonium. So,
hey, John, let me add something to that, though, that I've never really brought forward to any great extent, but a lot of people on the inside know. Semaphore Entertainment, as our joint venture partner, was responsible for marketing, advertising, and public relations because it was going to be their checkbook that would pay for that. Quite frankly, there were two people, Campbell McLaren and PR consultant Dan Cloris. You know, Cloris being the kind of guy who would handle the NBA and the NFL. And they really, looking at the contract that I had written for the fighters, seeing that the word death had been mentioned, decided that the advertising approach we were going to take was going to emphasize the fact that this was banned in Boston, people could die. This was the greatest and most brutal show since the Christians met the lions in the Colosseum. I wasn't sure, and I talk about it in the book at the time, that was maybe too edgy and we might have been crossing the line. But it was Campbell and Dan. And, you know, Campbell, I think, is a little loath to take credit for that now in public because a lot of fans, you know, feel that the thing that really hurt the UFC early on was that approach. On one hand, it had a lot of effect in attracting people to us, but it also was a dark side. What is your feeling about that?
Oh, no, I can tell you right now, Campbell McLaren has approached me about that because I've always come out saying, you know, it was the dumbest goddamn thing anyone could ever have said. and it caused us nothing but problems. And he approached me at an Invicta and said, I have a bone to pick with you over that. He goes, that was genius. He goes, that's what got people's attention. And I said, let me make this as clear as I can for you. You can think whatever you want. You were out pretty goddamn fast. I had to deal with your dumbass advertising for years and years, and going to court, having people throw it back in my face that aren't you the people that say that this could end in death?
Right.
So he to this day, I think he still thinks that was genius, and I still say he's an idiot.
I think that's the period and the comma on the end of that sentence, John. I think you're right.
That's it.
Art, the last thing that I want to ask you about, and you and I are obviously very close. We speak almost every day, but for our audience, can you talk about the emotions that you feel this week, the 22nd anniversary of the first UFC? Because I'm guessing in some ways it feels like a lifetime ago, but in other ways, especially talking and reminiscing with John, it feels like this stuff happened last week or last month.
Well, I've told the story that, watching the UFC grow has been like, seeing maybe another, if you're divorced, seeing another man raise your child. But I'm very proud and very pleased at what's happened. All the way from Bangkok in Thailand to Oslo in Norway, I've got Facebook MMA friends all over the world. I mean, this sport has just proliferated to the extent that I've got MMA friends in Afghanistan, of all places. So, I mean, this thing has really grown. It's really evolved. And certainly every time we roll around to November 12th, for me, it's a good time. I wound up hooking up with friends and family who are as enthusiastic about the event still, maybe as I am, if not more so. And it's really always a great feeling for me to relive this particular time in the fall when we memorialize the beginning, and it goes on. Now it's 22. We're moving into the year 23.
That is the great Art Davie joining us on Let's Get It On. Art and I wrote a book together about the origins of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, for which Big John wrote the foreword. It's called Is This Legal? The Inside Story of the First UFC from the man who created it. You can purchase it as a hardcover and also as an ebook right now on Amazon. It is currently being developed as a major motion picture. And we are back with you next week for an all-new episode of Let's Get It On, first available on Friday. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store for Android. Download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/letsgetitonpodcast, and on Twitter, @PodcastMMA for this show, and for us personally, @JohnMcCarthyMMA and @SeanWheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. That's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. For Big John McCarthy, the great Art Davie, producer Chris Lakin, and our entire crew, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Lineup Media Group, online at lineupmediagroup.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock on the Lineup Media Group Podcast Network. Leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or wherever you listen to the show. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring Let's Get It On, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Get all the Lineup Media Group podcasts like Jason Bucks with Panger on NHLpodcast.com, Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, and You're on the Clock NFL on our website at lineupmediagroup.com.